Hello everybody, and welcome to the video on section 10.4. This is the concluding section of chapter 10. So at the end of this video we will be done with financial mathematics. We conclude the chapter with a section on two big topics. The first topic is credit cards, and the second topic are loans. Loans like house loans and car loans, things like this. So both of those topics fall under the umbrella of consumer debt. So this final section is an exploration of debt. Since probably all of you will end up taking out loans in your lifetime if you don't already have a loan, this section should be particularly relevant to you. So let's start with credit cards. Generally speaking, credit cards charge exceptionally high interest rates, but you only pay interest if you don't pay your monthly balance in full. So before unpacking what this is saying, let me just point out to you that exceptionally high is a relative term. Credit card interest rates are exceptionally high when you compare them to, say, house loan interest rates or auto loan interest rates, things like this, business loan interest rates. So just to give you some perspective, I believe I've told you this already, but let me repeat. My car loan is at 1.89%. The interest rate on my house loan is 4.125%. The APR on my credit card is about 22%. So my credit card interest rate is much higher than my other loans. And I think when I was a student, I got student loans for like 7%, right? So basically all of the loans I've ever gotten are under 10% except for my credit card. However, if you want to see really exceptionally high interest rates, you should look at things like payday loans, which we did in section 10.2. So payday loans can have interest rates as high as 300% all the way up to 600%. So credit card rates are high, they are, but not compared to things like payday loans. They're high compared to normal loans like a normal mortgage, a normal auto loan, things like this. The nice thing about credit cards is that you don't pay any interest at all as long as you pay what you owe them in full each month. So if you make minimum payments or carry a balance on your credit card, you'll be paying a lot of interest. You will be paying a lot of interest because the rates are high. But on the other hand, if you just pay your balance off, you pay no interest. So what's happening here, let me just give you a concrete example. When I go to Hy-Vee and I swipe my Visa to pay for $100 in groceries, Visa is giving me a $100 loan, and I have to pay back to them by the end of the month. If I do that, if I pay them that $100 back at the end of the month, I pay no interest on top of it. So when Visa loans me $100, I of course must pay them their $100 back. Right? They're not just going to hand me $100 and then expect nothing in return. However, as long as I pay them back that $100 within a month, I don't pay any interest on top of that. So credit cards are short-term loans with no interest rate, or if you turn them into a longer-term loan, you will pay a high interest rate. So as it says here, if you pay your balance in full, using a credit card is like getting a short-term loan for free, whereby free here, what I really mean is interest-free. Okay, a loan implies that you are going to pay the money back. This is not a gift. However, when you pay no interest, that's the best kind of loan there is. That's an interest rate of 0%. When you use credit cards wisely, you get a rare opportunity. You get to use somebody else's money without paying a fee for doing it. Okay, this is very rare in the financial world. But when you use credit cards unwisely, they can be a financial trap. Imagine that you recently got a new credit card, and like most people, you did not pay much attention to the terms of use, right? It's just like installing the latest update of iTunes, right? Your eyes glaze over and you just check the box. You also did not pay any attention to the interest rate. which with this card is 24%. And the slide says whopping, but 24% is not unreasonable for credit cards. You'll commonly see interest rates in the low 20s, low to mid 20s. Also, the slide says like most people, and you can sort of hear the tone of the slide, right? It's sort of judging. Like most people, you're not paying attention. You should be paying attention. But in all fairness, I am one of these people. I haven't paid any attention to the terms of use. I also don't actually know what my APR is. I think it's something like 22%, but I don't know. And in my case, that information is irrelevant because I pay my balance off in full at the end of every month. So as long as you're paying your balance off in full, it doesn't matter what the APR is. It doesn't matter what the terms of use are. However, if you're not going to pay your balance off in full, you should know what your APR is, and you should know what the terms of use are. So continuing with this example, to make matters worse, you went out and spent a little more than you should have the first month, and to be precise, you spent almost $900. So what does that mean? That means that you swiped your card enough times that you bought $876 worth of stuff. So maybe you bought $200 worth of food, $100 worth of gas, you bought like a $500 TV, whatever. You bought $876 worth of stuff, and you charged that stuff to your credit card. Like with most credit cards, you have a little time from the time you got the statement. So this is a piece of paper that the credit card company has sent you, right? You open your mailbox, Visa has sent you a piece of paper saying, hey bro, you spent $876, so we need that money back, please. So you have a grace period to pay that money back. Your statement tells you, well, you don't have to pay all $876 if you don't want to. You could pay as little as $20 if you want to. So this is true of any credit card. There'll be a minimum payment you can make. So as long as you pay $20, they won't send bill collectors after you. You could just pay the credit card off. You could just pay them back their $876 and be done with it. Or you can pay them any amount in between. So you can pay them $400 back if you want to. That won't kill off your balance, but it will reduce it by $400. So let's consider these scenarios separately. In the first case, when you pay the full balance off, you pay it off, and it's over. And there's really nothing else to say about this. You paid no interest because you paid the balance off at the end of the month. So the next time you get a statement, that $876 will have disappeared, and the new statement will only include purchases you made the next month. In the second case, let's suppose you pay the minimum payment of $20. When your next bill comes, suppose you have a new balance of $1,165. This $1,165 will consist of three things. The first thing it will consist of is your old balance of $856. So remember the previous month you owed $876. You did not pay Visa back $876. You only paid Visa $20. So they took $20 off the $876, and now you still, of course, must pay them their $856 back. So this $1,165 has this $856 rolled into it. That $1,156 also includes charges for new purchases. So in this next month, let's say you spent $288 on new purchases. That will be rolled into your new balance as well. Finally, they will charge you interest. Okay, you did not pay your credit card off in full, so they're going to charge you a fee now. And they don't call it interest, they call it a finance charge, but it's the same thing. They're going to charge you a finance charge, in this case, of $21. Here's how they calculate $21. First, they calculate the periodic interest rate. So remember that the APR was 24%. And an APR is an annual rate. So they take that 0.24 and they divide it by 12 because there are 12 months. They then take that 2% and multiply it by this technical term here. It's called the balance subject to finance charge, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second. But basically, they have this balance here that's subject to the interest they're charging you. And so they take 2% of that, and they calculate the interest they will charge you as 21 bucks. So let's talk through where these numbers come from. The first number we just talked about a second ago, the periodic rate. You can just take the APR and divide by the number of billing periods. With a credit card, you're generally paying things off monthly, so you divide by 12. The balance subject to finance charge, which is a mouthful, but that's what credit cards call it, is obtained by taking the average of the daily balances over the previous billing period. So this is not super difficult to calculate, but your book has several examples where they just write out this average. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the calculation here because I don't want you watching a video that's an hour long. But if you're confused by what your book says about the actual calculation of that 1050, you must of course let me know. Now this balance that's subject to finance charge includes new purchases. So when you're paying interest on all your purchases, you lost your grace period now. Okay, so before you had a grace period when you were paying off at the end of each month, but now you don't. As soon as you carry a balance, the stuff that you rack up in the next month is now generating interest on you. Okay, so the finance charge is obtained by multiplying the periodic interest rate times this balance subject to the finance charge. So we get 2% of 1050, which is 21 bucks. So if you pay the minimum payment, you're going to end up paying 21 bucks in interest on the next billing cycle. Now the third option, you can make a payment that is more than the minimum payment but less than the full payment. You can pay whatever you want, essentially. So let's say for the sake of argument that you pay 400 bucks to the credit card company. So more than 20 but less than 876. When your next monthly bill comes, suppose that you now have a new balance of 777.64. So as in the previous option, this new balance consists of three things. Your previous balance, which in this case is 476, because remember you originally owed 876 and you didn't pay it off. You only paid 400 of it. So you knocked your balance down to 476. And again, you purchased $288 worth of new stuff. And the interest, which is obtained by multiplying the periodic rate times the balance subject to finance charge. And in this case, we get a balance subject to finance charge of 682. And so again, your book will walk you through where you get this number from. So when you take 2% of 682, you get an interest charge of $13.64, which is smaller than the $21 you were going to pay in option 2. But, you know, it's still money that you would like to not pay. So to conclude about credit cards, let me point out two things. Make sure you understand the terms of your credit card agreement. You should know the APR, you should know the length of your grace period, and you should understand the fine print. Although again, let me issue a slight caveat here. I actually know none of these things myself about my credit card. And the reason is because I pay my credit card off in full. So if you're going to pay the balance off every month, the APR doesn't matter, grace period doesn't really matter, right? Just at the end of each month. Actually, I think it's every 2 weeks. I just go ahead and pay off what I owe. Okay, if you're going to do something like that, you don't need to know anything about your card. You should make a real and concerted effort to pay your credit card balance in full each month. If you do that, you will avoid interest, or as credit card companies call it, finance charges. And you can avoid getting into a financial hole. So we've all heard stories, or maybe you haven't, but most of us have heard stories of people just racking up, 20, 30 grand in credit card debt. That can happen if you let your balances spiral out of control, especially if you're only making minimum payments each month. So if you can't make your credit card payments in full each month, you are probably living beyond your means. Now, there's some exceptions to this. Maybe you have an emergency, like a medical emergency or a car emergency or something, and you have no choice. You have to go past, and you can't pay off in full each month. That can happen. But if you're doing this repeatedly, if you are just constantly not paying off in full, you're probably living beyond your means, and you may consider putting your credit card away until you pay off the balance. Okay. Now, one other thing here is if you can't pay the full balance each month, you should still pay as much as you can. So if you owe $1,000 at the end of the month, it's better to pay $600 back than pay the minimum of $30 or whatever. So if you can't pay off in full, at least pay off what you can. Now let's move on to loans, like say auto loans and house loans. These loans are called installment loans, and they are a series of equal payments made at equal time intervals, usually monthly, though not always monthly, for the purpose of paying off a lump sum of money that somebody's handed you up front. Typical installment loans are for the purchase of a car on credit or the purchase of a home on credit, and the purchase of a home on credit is called a mortgage. So the way these things work is a bank or whoever just gives you a chunk of cash up front and you have to pay it off over a series of time or over a period of time. So when I bought my house, the bank loaned me $152,000. So the bank literally wrote a check on my behalf for $152,000 that allowed me to move into my home. So now, over the course of the next 20 or 30 years, depending on how fast I pay it down, I will have to pay off that $152,000, and I will do it while paying a hefty chunk of interest along the way. Here's a first example of an installment loan. You've landed a really good job, and you decide to buy the car you've always wanted, a brand new red Mustang. So you negotiate a price of about $24,000, including taxes and license fees and all of that sort of thing. You've saved $5,000 for a down payment. So what that means is you're just going to write yourself. You're just going to write a check for $5,000 when you purchase it. So $5,000, you'll notice, is not $24,000. So you're not paying full price for the car. You're ponying up just some of the money up front. So let's say your dealer offers you a 5-year loan at 6.48% APR. If you take out the loan from the dealer for this amount, right, so notice you don't need to borrow the full amount because you've paid $5,000 up front. So you're going to borrow $18,995. How much are you going to pay each month? That's the question we'll investigate now. And in particular, can you afford these payments? So typically, although typically is maybe a harsh term here, but many times buyers will blindly trust the financial department at the dealership to provide this sort of information accurately, but it doesn't always happen. As an educated consumer, you should feel more comfortable doing the calculation yourself, and maybe not necessarily by hand, but when you're actually taking out a loan, you should do these calculations yourself. Maybe using an online calculator, maybe doing it by hand, I don't know, but you can calculate these things yourself, and here's how the calculations go. Every time you make a future payment on an installment loan, that payment itself has a present value. The sum of the present values of all of the payments equals the present value of the loan, which in this case is $18,995, the amount that you are financing. So although each monthly loan payment of F has a different present value because you're paying the thing down, each of these present values can be calculated using the general compounding formula. So recall what that was. The present value P of a payment of F dollars paid T months in the future is given by this formula. The present value is future amount times 1 plus the monthly interest rate, because you're doing things monthly here, raised to this capital T, which remember is the number of compounding periods per year times the total number of years. So this formula can be found in section 10.3. That's where it's pulled from. So in this example, the monthly interest rate is that 6.48% chopped in 12 pieces, which is 0.0054. So the present value of the first payment is just f divided by that rate. The second payment is f divided by that rate squared. Sorry, not that rate, but 1 plus that rate. Right? That we have this 1 plus here in the formula. So the third payment, you're now at 3 up here, etc. So the present value of the last payment is f divided by 1.0054 raised to the 60th. So adding all these things up, you're going to get this 18,995. Now, this might not mean anything to you here. If it doesn't, that's okay. But if this does mean something to you, it helps see where things come from here. The left-hand side of the equation is a geometric sum. That's what this guy is here. So f divided by number plus f divided by the number squared, f divided by the number cubed, etc. That's a geometric sum with 60 terms and an initial term of f divided by 1.0054. So using the geometric sum formula, which again you might not know, if you don't know it, don't worry about it, the equation can be written like this. F divided by this rate plus 1 times all of this stuff. This is a nasty looking fraction, but you take 1 divided by the rate plus 1, raise it to the 60th power, and again, this 60 comes from 5 years monthly. You're doing 12 things a year for 5 years for a total of 12 times 5, which is 60. So that's where that comes from. And all of that is supposed to equal this 18,995. Okay, so from here, notice that with this staring at you, this is gross, right? You have this gross fraction right here, but F is what we want to find. F is the payment amount per month. So you can just ask your calculator what, like this is right here, this top of the fraction. You can ask your calculator what this bottom of the fraction is. You can do the division, you can divide over, you can multiply this 1.0054 over. Again, in the interest of time, I'm not walking through this, but if this confuses you, you must just let me know, right? And we can talk through it. But let me just say, this is a nasty looking equation, but if you start asking your calculator what these numbers are, you can simplify it down and you can solve it just like we've been solving equations in previous sections. And if you solve this to get F, you will get something around $371. Okay, so remember, we borrowed 18,995. We're going to pay that amount off over 5 years at an interest rate of 6.48%. To do that, we must pay the dealership about $371 every month. So even though you may have negotiated a good price for the car, when you throw in all of the interest, which again in the auto loan world is called financing costs sometimes, this might not be such a great deal after all. Because if you think about it, you're going to make this payment monthly for 5 years, which means you're going to write 60 checks, all of this amount. 60 checks, all of this amount totals to about $22,000. Even when adjusting for inflation, it's happening over 5 years, that's quite a bit more than this 19 grand you borrowed. Okay, so let's talk through that again. You're going to write a check for this amount every month for 5 years to the dealership. So if I just asked you, hey, what's the total amount of money you give to the dealership? You would say, well, I'm giving the dealership this amount, this $371.48, every month for 5 years. That's a total of 60 payments. So all you have to do to figure out the total amount is 60 times this number, and you will get this number, about 22 grand. This number is about 3 grand more than what you borrowed. Okay, so you borrowed 19 grand. You're going to pay the dealership not just 19 grand back, you're going to pay them an extra $3,300. So you're going to pay $3,300 in interest on this loan. Okay, which, if you think about it, it's a lot of money, right? Now, here's the formula you should know. So if you don't understand where this comes from, that's okay. That geometric sum stuff is just in case you've seen that before, you can now see where this comes from. But you will not be tested over where this comes from or something. You can just take this formula as a given. And what this formula does is it relates the amount of money you borrowed. So the 19 grand this guy borrowed for his car is paid off in T payments of F dollars. Oops, I'm sorry. What do we have? Okay, so this M right here should be an F. I'm sorry, that's a typo. Sometimes they use M, sometimes they use F. But in this case, there's an F here, so there should be an F here. So F equals P times little p, 1 plus little p to the t, etc. In this example, you just get this expression here, this equation here. Okay. So here's the amortization formula that relates the amount you borrow to the amount you have to pay back every month. So let's use this formula to keep going with this Mustang example. So during certain times of the year, automobile dealers offer incentives in the form of cash rebates or reduced financing costs, including a 0% interest rates. Often the buyer can choose between those two options. You can get a rebate or you can get 0% APR. Given a choice between a cash rebate or cheap financing, a savvy buyer should be able to figure out which of the two is better. So imagine you've bought this Mustang and the dealer comes to you and they say, well, we'll give you $2,000 off now, or we'll let the first 2 years of the loan be interest free. Which of those deals is better for you? That's what we're going to answer now. So just to keep things simple, we'll keep the parameters the same here. You bought a car for this price, but you didn't borrow that price because you paid $5,000 down. So now you have a choice. You can choose between a cash rebate of $2,000, or in this case, they're going to charge you no interest for the life of the loan, all 60 months. So typically this won't happen. Typically a dealership or a furniture store or something will say, we'll give you 0% APR for the first year, or maybe the first 2 years. But for the sake of this example, let's go with the 5 years. If you choose the cash rebate, you will have an initial balance of now $16,995. Okay, so remember, you originally borrowed $18,995, but now the dealership is just giving you $2 grand up front. So that knocks down the balance to $16,995. And you're still going to finance at the 6.48% interest rate. If you choose the free financing, you will have 0% APR for 60 months on a balance of $18,995. So which of these works out better for you in the end? So let's just consider the monthly payments under both options. For option 1, we take the $2,000 rebate and notice that all we've done, where is it? Here is what we did originally when we borrowed $18,995. Well, now we're not borrowing $18,995 anymore. We're borrowing $16,995. And we're back. Okay. So once again, this is nasty looking, but just take it a step at a time. Ask your calculator what this is, do the division, do it one step at a time, and you can solve for F. And we end up with an F value of $332.37. So that's how much you're going to pay each month now. So notice this number is smaller than what we got before, which was $371.48. Okay, it should be smaller because you're borrowing less money. Okay, here we go. So we've reduced our monthly payment by like $40 a month. For option 2, if we take the 0% APR, then the present value is just $18,995, and now we're paying it off over 60 months at 0% APR. Well, since there's no interest involved here, we don't need to deal with any formulas. You're just going to pay $18,995 off over 60 months. No interest involved. So all you do is you chop $18,995 into 60 pieces, because again, you're doing things monthly for 5 years, so you're going to write a total of 60 checks, and each check will be worth this much, $316.59. Oops. I hate that it does that to me. Okay, so let me just leave it small like this. Well, oh goodness. Okay, I forget that it does all this. Normally I don't use PowerPoint. Usually I use a math. Okay, whatever. I hate the entire Microsoft Office suite, to be honest with you. Mathematicians don't typically use it. But anyway, here we are at the end. And notice that that $2,000 upfront option, that sounds nice because they're saying, hey, here's a check for $2,000 right now. But in the long run, that actually isn't better for you. In the long run, just taking the 0% APR and not reducing the balance actually worked out better for you. You're going to end up paying, what, $16 less every month to the dealership with this option. Okay, so hopefully this has given you some sort of sense of how to navigate the loan world. I mean, to actually navigate the loan world takes more than one section of a textbook, right? But this is at least a beginning, and you can start to sort of play around with this sort of thing, and hopefully it's useful to you as you move forward. Okay, so we've now concluded Chapter 10. You will have an exam on Chapter 10 tomorrow after you finish this section. So if you have any questions, please let me know.